Welcome to our program, Hollywood Structured. Our program is designed to help the young people who wish to enter the entertainment field, may it be in nightclub work, theater, film, or television. It is also designed to help the parents and the educators of those young people, to make them understand their wants, their needs, and the pitfalls and the trap they may fall into unless thoroughly acquainted with the inner workings of Hollywood. In shows to come, we will introduce you to several Hollywood personalities who will help you understand the inner workings of Hollywood. Personalities such as Jacqueline Bisset, star of The Deep and co-producer of Rich and Famous, Linda Gray, star of Dallas and now also a television director, Jean Reynolds, producer, director, writer of MASH and Lou Grant, Barney Rosenzweig, executive producer of Cagney and Lacey, Bobby Frank, producer for film for television, Julianne Johnson, stunt coordinator for Charlie's Angel, Tanya Walker, Ken Schreiner, stars of the soap opera General Hospital, Brianne Murphy, cinematographer for Highway to Heaven, Nina Blanchard, agent for print and commercial, Doug Smart, associate director on Empty Nest, Bobby Miner, stunt coordinator for Magnum PI, Jack Cash, assistant director on features, Barbara Miller, head of all the casting department at Lorimar, Sandy Pollock, publicist, and many, many more personalities from all the branches of the industry. They will speak to you bluntly, candidly, amusingly, but always truthfully. And maybe through their talking truthfully to you, you will learn from their mistakes, from their failure, from their accomplishments, and from their success. We will also speak to you about scams in Hollywood, different kinds of scams. Today, however, I want to speak about the worst one, which is recruiting young people, and when I say young people, I mean 12 years old. Recruiting young people and putting them into a life of pornography, prostitutions, and drugs. Young people who arrive in this town at the rate of 1,000 a week, and many more during the summer, who arrived here ill-prepared for the countless rejection, with very little money in their pockets, if any, knowing no one, whose wish is to look as sexy or as rugged as their favorite stars. And they are alone. And very shortly, they will fall prey to someone who will befriend them, someone who will represent themselves as a producer, a director, a musician, a band leader, a personal manager, an agent, a casting director, and who in fact will turn out to be nothing more than a pimp. So today, we have the great pleasure of having with us a woman who had the courage to rescue those kids. She first took them into her own home. Later, she established a shelter. She is now the executive director of a community program called Children of the Night. Her name is Dr. Lois Lee. Hello, Lois.
Thank you. Hello.
It is a great pleasure to have you with us today. And I would like you to explain to the people out there, the parents and the educators and the young people, did you have any idea when you were in school, in college, that you would be doing this kind of work right now?
Well, I wanted to do something in criminology. I wanted to be in the FBI, but The first time I called, they were not accepting women, and then I graduated with my bachelor's degree, and then they had height requirements, and I wasn't tall enough. And then I went to work as a vice president of prison parole at my state college, and worked with some people that were being pre-released into the community, but didn't really want to work with male criminals because I found them intimidating. And I started to look at female crime and found that most women were arrested for prostitution. Even women that were in jail for serious crimes were first arrested for prostitution. And that was interesting to me in and of itself, that they would start as prostitutes. And so I took on the police, and for my doctorate's degree, I decided to sue the police department for not arresting an equal number of customers, because I think that the men should go to jail if the girls go to jail too. So with that, I became an expert witness for the ACLU and for private attorneys, and we challenged the enforcement of the prostitution law, and 2 girls I'd met in court cases were killed by the Hillside Strangler. One was only 17 years old. And I became very involved in that serial murder investigation and coordinated the prostitutes on the streets that I'd met with law enforcement, and I myself ended up testifying against the Hillside Strangler. And from there, the prostitutes are the ones who actually said to me, you know, it's really too late for you to help us with your politics, but you've got to do something about kids. And they took me out in the streets, and they took me into condemned buildings, and they showed me where kids were prostituting, some as young as 11, 12 years old. And I treated them like I had treated the adult prostitutes, with no real inclination or desire to set up a program for kids, but I would say, here's my card, here's my number, if there's anything I can do for you, give me a call. And they called. And
can you explain directly to the young people how they get recruited in their particular life?
Kids, pimps and pornographers are professional con men, and they know exactly how to treat kids. One of the first things they'll do when they approach a child is they will ask you, why don't you have your dad buy you a car? Why don't you have your dad buy you that dress? They will challenge you with questions that get you to talk about yourself. And as kids, you tend to be your own worst enemies. You tend to tell people what the weaknesses are in your family situation and what your personal weaknesses are. Oftentimes, kids will say things like, well, I don't have a daddy, or my daddy's an alcoholic, or my dad doesn't care about me, or my dad doesn't have any money. And then they will take whatever it is you say in order to manipulate you into prostitution. They'll take that. If you say your parents don't have any money, or your parents don't care about you, then they'll say, well, let me show you how you can make money, how you can be just like a Cheryl Ladd, how you can be like a Farrah Fawcett. The girls in Charlie's Angels were often used as role models by pimps in order to encourage kids to become prostitutes. And from there, they will put you in a full-time profession of prostitution. Sometimes they will give you drugs to lower your inhibition, to take nude pictures of you. Sometimes then they'll take those pictures and they'll threaten to give them to your parents or your grandparents or your friends at school to show them what you really are. If you refuse to cooperate with them, they may beat you into submission. Sometimes they put kids in motels, in the back of motel rooms, and charge people $15 to go in the room and do whatever they want to you for 15 minutes. And after a week or sometimes 2 weeks, they'll get money from a more sophisticated pimp, and the more sophisticated pimp will come in and kick the door in and walk in as your rescuer. They will tell you that it's the way that you can get back at the world, and that you're only going to prostitute for a short period of time, and then they're going to introduce you to a movie producer, because in order to be an actress you have to be sensual, you have to have the sexual body language, you have to know how to behave, how to treat men, which are fallacies, which are not true. But they will tell you that these things are necessary. It's very easy for these people to pick up press passes or identification to show you that they're in the movie industry. 4 years ago, I met a man on the street who had a Gucci briefcase. He had a press pass. He had a magazine. He had a 20th Century Fox ID. He had a magazine with the name of the ID was in the magazine, and I knew that he was not the producer from 20th Century Fox. He'd obviously stolen it. But he was someone who approached us on the street and asked us to go through this little routine of walking up to each other as if we just met each other. And then he wanted us to go into some back room. Usually they'll start with trying to get you to take your clothes off to take nude pictures. They will tell you that they know famous people, but that you're not ready to be introduced to them, that you have to go through a training program that they will operate. They're professional con men. They are very, very successful at taking children, and sometimes even young adults, who are unaware of how to get into the movie industry have taken them down the path of prostitution or pornography. It's very common. It's a fact of life in Hollywood, on the streets of Hollywood.
Are the young people not afraid of AIDS? Are they aware that it exists?
Yes, they're aware that it exists, but when they're taking lots of drugs, they don't take precautions. I mean, sometimes they drive when they take drugs, they walk across busy streets when they take drugs, and they forget to use condoms. Prostitution is a very, very dangerous business, and every time you get into someone's car, you run the risk of being killed. If you say to a child, which we've said before, don't you realize you can die from AIDS, they will say that, don't you realize I could die tonight in the car with the next stranger. So they disassociate like everyone else.
How did you start? I mean, you didn't plan to do that.
No.
With your life.
I was running a hotline out of my house for prostitutes, for adult prostitutes actually, in order to get more information for my research for my doctorate's degree. And I had started with these lawsuits of getting the 15,000 police reports from the courts to analyze. And I would go out on the streets and I would talk to prostitutes. And I would find that, you know, I had one prostitute who wanted to get off heroin, and I took her into welfare to try and get her off heroin, and she wasn't eligible for welfare because she was a prostitute, and they couldn't determine how much money she was making on the side. So she was not, prostitutes, whether they're adults or kids, are not eligible for services like other people that commit crimes or other people who are sexually abused at home.
Well, isn't there a law that provides for, like, from $1,000 to $3,000 to rehabilitate young criminals?
Yes, but prostitution, when kids are arrested for prostitution, the judges do not see those as crimes against property. They're only crimes against themselves. And so they're very reluctant to put children in that system, in the probation system, and provide for their care.
This is unfair.
It's terribly unfair. In juvenile court, sometimes you will see very sophisticated pimps send in, or even madams send in women to go in and pose as the kid's parent. And the courts will release the child to the parent right there in the courtroom with no identification whatsoever. When kids, when I first started trying to help kids and they come to my house, if they had court cases, I would make them go to court. And we would go to court, and the courts would just sign these kids over to me because there was no place for them to put them. And the parents didn't want them, but even the courts never even bothered to really contact their parents to verify that it was okay for the kids to come live with me. And over a 3-year period, I had over 250 kids come through my house.
Do you find that it is easier to communicate with them before they start, during, or later on?
Before or later on. In the middle, it's very, very difficult. Because when they've prostituted on the streets for a certain period of time and involved themselves in these acts, they have to believe that they are going to have that house, they are going to have the hat shop, they're going to have a baby, that they are doing it for a reason. And it's very difficult to convince them that, no, you've been prostituting and this pimp's been spending all of the money and you're not going to get a dime. When kids come to us, I don't care how much money, some were making $500, $1,000 a night on the streets. When they leave their pimp, they leave with nothing but their clothes on their back. And one of the sad things, I mean, that really brings home to me that we're talking about kids is you may get a child away from a pimp, and we may have her in our intake center and working with her, and she breaks down and cries because she has to have her teddy bear. And we actually use the police to go back to the pimp's house to take, you know, what her personal belongings are when that's possible. It's not always possible. But sometimes they're very attached to the one thing that they took with them when they left home.
I wish you would explain to the people out there, if somebody is trying to get away from a pimp or a horrendous situation, how do they contact you, the Children of the Night?
Children of the Night has a street team. We go out on the streets and we put stickers and payphones that say, tired of turning tricks, pimps don't care, we do, call day or night. This is confidential. We also have plastic cards that we give kids on the streets, and we do lots of television shows. We run commercials when possible. Most of the kids come to us through someone else who has been to our organization. The kids tell, it's word of mouth primarily, and I think that's important because if you're not providing a good service, kids certainly are not going to refer their friends. And when kids call us, we have them picked up immediately and taken to a safe location. We're known for that. We also pay for plane tickets for kids to go home. We put them only on direct flights. Oftentimes when kids do have parents that are willing to accept them back in the home, we work out a drug program and have a drug intervention counselor as well as the parent pick them up at the airport, because once the kids are in drugs, the problems are more than what your normal parent is capable of handling.
Can you prevent yourself from being involved?
No. I don't even try to prevent myself. I get emotionally involved with all of our kids, and so does my staff, and I think that's one of the things that makes our program very effective. The kids refer to us as their parents. Usually they have one staff person picked out over another. Usually whoever the child has first contact with is who they're going to be closest attached to. And we allow that flexibility in the program, that if the child came in the first time just for identification and they're attached to you, you can follow them through their whole series of problems to help them get off the streets.
Now, you have been very successful. Have you had any that fell by the wayside?
Yes, about 17% of our kids fall by the wayside each year, but we still continue to provide services to them. We tell them that, you know, if you want to go back to the streets, that's your choice, but we have a 24-hour hotline. We'll always pick you up and take you to a safe location. We'll always get you to a hospital if you need to go to a hospital. We'll always go to court with you if you have to go to court, and we usually end up picking them up a couple years down the road.
Now, I understand that all the work that you do or did was totally voluntary. Am I correct?
It was until 1982, and it was all volunteer effort. And then in 1982, we had raised enough money to set up an intake center in Hollywood, and someone had to run it, and I was the one who ended up running it, and so now I have 8 paid staff and 30 volunteers.
I see, but is this government funded?
No, it's all through private donations. We have people that send us $25 a month, every single month. And we have foundations and corporations and celebrities that help us as well. But it's a constant effort in order to raise the money, to keep the letters going out, to keep the visibility going, so that people will help us. We don't want to get involved in government funding, because when the government gives you money, they also give you a program. And I figure if they knew how to take care of this problem, we wouldn't have it. And the kinds of limitations, I mean, they emphasize psychological counseling, and in many respects, I see the problem as a larger societal problem rather than a problem lodged in an individual child's head. And they would not let us pay for taxi cabs to transport kids. There's so many things they would not let us do that we do. We're basically a family set up to where we're the parents to these kids. We have a big Christmas party coming up for the kids every year, and we go out and buy them gifts, and the government certainly wouldn't let you do that, and I think that that's a real important part of being the significant person in this child's life.
I am surprised because you received, if I'm correct, the Presidential Voluntary Award Action,
yes,
or Voluntary Action Award in 1984 for President Reagan. And this is why I cannot comprehend that the government would not bend to what you're doing, which is excellent for those kids.
Well, the government offers me money. We don't take it. So, I mean, the government, we're certainly eligible to get government money.
But then they would tell you what to do.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
That's what you don't want.
Absolutely. In California here, the Office of Criminal Justice Planning appropriated, I think, $600,000 for the entire state to help kids involved in prostitution. But what immediately happened is they expanded that definition of prostitution, the agencies that took the money, so that they didn't have to help real prostitute kids. They helped kids doing survival sex, is what they called it. And you know, which is ridiculous. Then you get involved in children's sexual relationships among each other, and I don't think that's something you can legislate.
I see. Is it true that prostitution has expanded along the West Coast?
Yes, it's very mobile. It's changed dramatically. We see much more of prostitution, child prostitution, in the suburbs. The pimps will move from Tacoma, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Seaside, Monterey, Salinas, into Orange County, San Diego, sometimes back up through Hollywood. What they do is when they hit a new town, they will work their experienced prostitutes, and then they're on the streets looking for runaways that they can pick up and put into their prostitution circuit. While they're in the runaway's hometown, or even in Hollywood, they would take her to dinner, they'd buy her some clothes, they'd be sweet to her, and when they picked her up and moved her to San Diego is when they'd put her on the streets. So they're constantly recruiting, looking for kids. They have people, pimps have people that work for them too. They're parking lot attendants. Some of them are security guards. Some of them are cab drivers. Sometimes they're security guards in children's amusement parks. We've seen that too.
Really? Wait, didn't you say earlier that they are close to Disneyland also now?
Well, one of the areas where they're working a lot of 14-year-old female prostitutes is on Harbor Boulevard, just down the street from Disneyland.
Oh my God. Now, when you started rescuing those young people, were you not afraid for your life?
No, not at that time. I was too intensely involved with fighting the police and their dealings of handling it. And I quickly switched to fighting children's welfare because I thought that these kids were certainly entitled to protection and homes and care, just like any other kids. And so there was a lot of anger that was motivating me. And I think that was the one thing that kept me going so long. And then when I was about done doing my research, I overheard one of the kids that was staying in my house say, "You just watch, she'll put us on the street with it like everyone else as soon as she finishes that paper." And so I was forced to turn to them and say something to them. I said, "No, I'm going to set up a program for you." Now, I was naive enough to think I could set up a program and go back and teach in college in a year, but that was 1982.
And
I'm still here. I'm still here, and I'm probably going to be here for another 10 years.
Do you want to teach?
I've taught college, and I enjoy teaching college. It's a different lifestyle for me. I think there's some real questions whether it'd be enough for me now, because this work is certainly demanding. It's exciting, it's challenging, and I don't know that I'd have all that in a college university.
What do you teach?
Criminology, social welfare, human services.
Now, when you keep talking about young people, and I mentioned the age 12, can you tell me the average age of those young kids?
14-year-old females is probably the average age.
And the boys?
There are more 14-year-old females than anything else. With boys, 14 is another very common age. 30% of our clients, in fact, are boys. And they get the same kind of runaround that someone's going to put them in the movie industry, and this is what they have to do. They have to be nice to this person, which means providing sex in order to get introduced to a producer. And, you know, we have a studio located right on Santa Monica Boulevard where the boys work as prostitutes. And so because of the location of the studio, that lends itself to con men saying, "I can take you in there if you do what I do."
Really? I'm surprised because I'm in this town, and obviously there are many things that I don't know that are taking place.
There's a whole world out there that operates that most people don't understand. I mean, it's just like, in some ways it's very similar to the larger society. There's a set of do's and don'ts. There's a way to survive. There's a way to make money. There's people you have to defer to. It's a whole society in and of itself, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people involved in it. The interesting thing is that the men who are out there molesting the kids, pimping, and involved in pornography never change. They're the same guys that were there 10 years ago when I started. The kids are different. The kids' faces change, and it's constantly a different kid's face. We've seen over 5,000 kids that we've worked with
In the last
10 years.
10 years. I, as you know, I'm a TV director and I'm a drama coach also, and I find that many young people come in this town ill-prepared. They think they will become a star yesterday. Their expectation is totally false. You cannot have expectation, but they have to be real. You know that it will take training. You know that it will take time.
I think most kids don't realize that you have to go to school to be an actor or an actress, just like you have to go to school to be anything else, that it is a profession. And that's probably one of the most difficult things, because the kids don't plan when they run away. They don't know where they're going to stay. They think maybe they'll stay in shelters, but there is no place to stay. Most of the time they end up in condemned buildings. Then they're grubby. They can't get up and go to an interview. And if you're on the streets and you don't have a place to stay, the likelihood of you doing drugs just to cope with living on those streets is very high. Kids that will go and stay in these condemned buildings, they're raped weekly. They're knifed usually once a month. People will hold them out the window. These guys will hold them out the window and say, "You either have sex with me or I'm going to drop you." So they will have sex with them. They pick up diseases, staph infection as well as venereal disease. It's not fun out on those streets. And once you get on those streets, it's very, very hard to get off. And sometimes when you leave home, you end up burning that last tie to home, to where your parents may not let you come back home.
I want to ask you to speak to the parents directly. What to do if and when the children leave home, and if they want to come back?
Well, the minute your child leaves home, what you need to do is file a missing persons report with the police department. And just because they tell you if they filed it is not really good enough. You need to wait for a day or two and call back and have them check the computer to make sure that it's in the computer and that it's national. Because if your child does meet someone who's a pimp or a pornographer, they're going to move your child throughout the United States. You're probably not going to find your child in your hometown. There are a lot of reasons that parents are not willing to let their kids come home, but I don't really find any justification for that when I see the kind of toilet that these kids live in. And that's specifically what they live in the streets of Hollywood. Your kids are going to die. You might as well condemn them to a death on the streets. It's a horrible, ugly, awful, demoralizing kind of life on the streets. We lose 2% of our kids are deceased every year when we do our follow-up, 2% of the kids that we've worked with. And we're only working with 500 kids a year. I'm sure that the numbers are much higher when you talk about the kinds of kids that don't reach out and go to social service agencies. If you're unable to care for your kids in a particular way, then you should research your family ties for someone that may be willing to help. And something that the larger society needs to understand, these kids need to be provided services now. It's an issue. Without any kind of intervention in the lives of these kids, they're going to end up in the criminal justice system, which will cost you $30,000 a year in taxpayers' money. So you either pay now or you pay later.
I understand that you have a pet project now.
Yes.
You want to talk about it?
Yeah, we bought the old Van Nuys post office, which we're turning into a 24-bed shelter, which will have a classroom in it, and it'll have an aerobics program, and the kids will have counselors there, and they have group activities each night, everything from Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, to someone from the stunt school wanted to come in and work with them, hobbies and crafts, and it's a place where the kids can stay until they're appropriately placed. And the kids that are 16 and over will be placed in jobs. Their money will go into a trust fund. When they've accumulated enough money, we will go out and help them find an apartment and set them up in their own first apartments, which we do now, but it's very difficult to do that from the streets into their own apartments. And we get contributions from the community of sofas and beds and things, so we're able to furnish their apartments for them. And this is something I've wanted to do for 10 years, and I'm real happy it's here.
All right. Well, I would like to thank Dr. Lois Lee for courage. May I add that the FBI may have found you short, but I don't find you short on courage. You're wonderful.
Thank you.
Parents, educators, and you young people out there, remember that the word show business is composed of two words, show and business. And we intend to teach you the business of show business. Making a movie is business. Doing a television show is business. Putting on a play is business. Doing a nightclub act is business. Show business. Remember that. Now, please keep watching us, because we keep watching out for you. Thank you. See you next time. For more information about Children of the Night, call or write Children of the Night, 1800 North Highland, Suite 128, Hollywood, California, 90028. The phone number is 213-461-3160.